Alright, let's climb to 3,500.
3,000, climbing to 3,500.
You need more right rudder.
Are you sure?
We all need right rudder to climb, and listen to your CFI, it's going to save you some time.
Right Rudder Marketing. We're pilots who help flight schools grow. Let's train more pilots.
The little tour clear one is like
My friend.
All right, Maisha, take one.
sorry. Okay, 1, 2.
Good, keep coming down.
A little bit more.
Alright, let's climb to 3,500.
3,000, climbing to 3,500.
You need more right rudder.
Are you sure?
We all need right rudder to climb, and listen to your CFI, it's going to save you some time.
Right Rudder Marketing. We're pilots who help flight schools grow. Let's train more pilots.
The little tour clear one is like
My friend.
All right, Maisha, take one.
sorry. Okay, 1, 2.
Good, keep coming down.
A little bit more.
Alright, let's climb to 3,500.
3,000, climbing to 3,500.
You need more right rudder.
Are you sure?
We all need right rudder to climb, and listen to your CFI, it's going to save you some time.
Right Rudder Marketing. We're pilots who help flight schools grow. Let's train more pilots.
How is it going, everybody? Welcome to the Aviation Business Podcast. This is your host, Tim Jedrick. I'm the owner of Right Rudder Marketing. So we have a very special guest today. We always have a special guest today. It's always great having people on the show here. Before we introduce our guest, let's take care of some housekeeping here. If you're with us live, we have it looks like about 3-4 people right now on the call with us today, or in the studio room. Make sure you silence your phones, I guess, and pay attention. But realistically over here, if you're in the room with us, or whether you're on YouTube or Twitter, Facebook, whatever, there is the chat button. So if you leave a comment on YouTube, you see it. If you are in the room here at Riverside, on the right side of the screen, there is the chat button. If you can drop your questions there, we can try to answer them, all the type of stuff. With that being said, yeah, I am the owner of Right Rudder Marketing. So Right Rudder Marketing is a marketing agency. We help flight schools all across the country and the globe grow and scale their businesses, help enroll more student pilots. Our mission and vision is to train more pilots. We want to help 100 flight schools across the nation and the globe double their student enrollments. That's what we do for a living, and that's what we're here for. But all that aside, we do have a lot of stuff going on in the coming months and weeks. So first off, we have a Facebook group we started about a couple of months ago. It's not too active, but I'd like to formally extend my invitation to you guys. There's a link down here. Check us out on Facebook. Not everyone is a flight school customer. Everyone's just might be a random customer there, or a random flight school. Who knows? And we like to drop ideas there, and it's a nice think tank, so to speak. If you can't make it to the trade shows or to the events and the conferences that are out there in our industry, highly recommend plugging into the community. That's one form of doing that. We also have our social media, so like, subscribe, follow, and do all that type of stuff. Really appreciate it if you do that. That being said, the Ascend conference is coming up pretty soon, so we are exhibiting at that. So Right Rudder Marketing will be there. Link is there below. That's hosted by Aero Summit and Stratus Financial in partnership with the National Association of Flight Instructors. So we do want to give a quick shout out to Stratus Financial, Brandon Martini and all them, and especially Leslie, who I've grown to know in the past few years of working together. And I guess we can say this is sponsored by them. I don't know. There's no formal sponsorship yet, but they did introduce me to our guest. So I really want to shout out, Leslie for introducing us. And today's guest, her name is Carolina. So, Carolina, you there? Hey, there she is. Carolina, normally what I do for these shows is I like to always have you guys introduce yourself. So maybe you can give us a quick introduction of who you are, what you've done, and what you're doing.
Sure. So I'm Carolina Gianardi. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Intros. I've been in aviation for the last 4 years, and before that I've been 30 years in large corporation, mainly in financial services. So maybe you wonder why after so many years, international in financial services, I joined aviation, but hopefully during the conversation it will become more clear. So I've always been finance, payments, B2B sales and marketing, but even in the large corporation, my real interest has been in building a new venture. So at certain point in the career, I thought it was the time to build my own venture. And that's how Intros came out. Intros is co-founded with my partner Vito. And Vito Tedeschi started the business with his background in technology aviation. He's a private pilot. And while he was building this venture, I started to get interest in aviation. And that's when at a certain point I decided it was going to be my full-time job.
Cool. So you've worked about three decades, I guess you can say, in the financial sector. I'm looking kind of at your profile here. GE Capital, Poste Italiane, and then even American Express over in Italy. So what kind of, I guess, brought you from the financial sector to the aviation industry, if I might ask?
Well, I think it is, looking at the business with a financial lens. So, looking at aviation, definitely growing business, definitely asset business. And what surprised me is we always talk about training, but we never really look at the fact that probably a flight school, before being a training organization, should be an asset management organization, because the assets, they own or they lease to operate the business, are very, very expensive. And, looking at them at their return on investment, I think is a different perspective I'm trying to bring into the industry.
Cool. So I know that there's right here, I think our producer is showing kind of what your product is. It's called Intuos, and that's what kind of bridged the gap from the financial sector to where you are today. Can you talk us to a little bit about what this is? What is Intuos?
Sure. Intuos is a tech company that is building together the digitalization of the operating process with data management. What we are trying to do is to connect what's happening on the ground of a flight school together with what's happening, during the flight. And what we have built is an ecosystem where, through proprietary and patent IoT device, we provide the plug-and-play flight data monitoring solution that provide any customer with real-time data about the flight and bring the data into the daily operation to take informed decision and to try to make their asset more profitable.
So if I'm just kind of to wrap that in a simple word, it's kind of like a black box for general aviation, is that right? Because I know in the airlines in 121 world, that God forbid there's an accident or something like that, there's like an orange box or a black box they call it, which just has like the cockpit voice recorder. There's a lot of, maybe I don't know if this has a cockpit voice recorder, but it has the flight data. So what's the trim setting? Did they bank right? Did they bank left? What's the throttle setting? So on and so forth. Is this kind of similar to what that is, or is it some? Or am I missing the mark?
No, this is the starting point. I think there are, two addition on that. The first one is that those type of information we are able to transmit real time to the ground. So it's not just if something goes wrong and you try to rebuild what happened during the flight, but really as the aircraft is flying and the student and instructor are on the air, people on the ground can see if there is any event that could require attention. And on top of that, once the aircraft is landed, of course, there are all the trend analysis about not only the single flight, but all of the flight on that aircraft and all of the flight of a specific student if the student flew different aircraft. And on top of that, we have a second device that is a plug and play for monitoring propeller and engine. The other important piece is that through algorithm that utilize the audio we register inside the aircraft and the vibration, we are able to detect anomalies in the RPM of the propeller or in the vibration of the engine. And again, it's a plug and play. You don't need, to put a sensor inside your engine. So even, aircraft that do not have sophisticated aviation can benefit, from this solution. And again, the benefit is that you don't have to do anything. The data are directly in your database. And, as soon as the aircraft land and during the flight, you know exactly what happened.
I guess I have two questions for you. So what specific data points are we capturing? I mean, you talked about kind of there's two modules. You have one that does the engine monitoring, one maybe not does engine monitoring. So I'm kind of interested in what data points are captured with this system. And secondly, you mentioned it's also plug and play. So I guess the question that's on any flight school owner's mind is, do you need an STC for this? Just supplemental type certificate in order to install this? Yep. Do you need to have it done by an A&P, or is just you literally put the box in the plane and check your weight and balance and just take off? What's the process for that? So yeah, 2 questions.
Yeah, let's start with the first. One device is focused on telemetry data, and the second device, as you said, is focused on engine data. Regarding telemetry, we are able to measure not only the GPS variable, but we have an HRRS sensor inside, so pitch, roll, yaw, and we can detect any maneuver that can get closer to envelope. The system is not connected with avionics, and that's the reason why we can define plug and play. So the information, to be very transparent, we miss is the airspeed. So, you know, in the calculation of angle attack, we work with machine learning and algorithm to provide, you know, information that otherwise you would be able, you know, only to get, you know, with the airspeed. The second device, again, we work with algorithm. We collect audio, and we translate audio into propeller RPM. And on top of that, with accelerometer, we measure vibration and we fusion the 2 pieces of information. The device is plug and play because, as I said, is not connected with avionics, is connected with the bus of the aircraft. For time being, we have been pushing in Europe and in South Africa, and we have been able to do without STC, because we can apply what is called ESA CSTAN. So it means it's considered a standard change. We respect weight, we respect, you know, no interference. So really, we don't need any special approval. To give an idea, if you look at the US, is something similar to the NORD-Z rule that, you know, allow you, of course, after some check, to plug and play some removable devices. So that's really why we call them plug and play. Of course, in any country, we check, you know, we are compliant with legislation, and if we need to make, you know, any minor adjustment, of course, we do that. So STC, you don't need STC. You don't need STC. Yeah, that's yeah, the final point I wanted to make. Yeah.
And then the caveat to that is you do not measure airspeed, but you're inferring that with the algorithm via you said an AHAR system. You have an AR system in there, and then you also have kind of the accelerometer as well. That's kind of monitoring that. Plus, you also have the audible, you know, sound of the propeller, which you're monitoring potentially RPMs with, and you're using kind of that data to really infer and calculate the other types of data that you might have had if you were to have an STC connected with an engine monitor, something like that. So you're able to do this without, I guess, the overhead of, you know, getting an STC and having A&P install it. You're able to get this data that's helps flight school. So if I was a flight school, I guess why, this is kind of the hard questions now. If I'm a flight school, why would I need something like this in my aircraft? Let's say I operate a fleet of, say, 4 or 5 Cessna 172s, and you know, we take off, we fly 60, 70 hours a month. I don't know. Sounds pretty typical. And then, you know, we kind of measure. We have oil analysis already. Every time we do the 100 hours, you know, we do the 100 hours. We do inspections there. What benefit would this type of system help with a flight school?
Well, I think, well, if you talk about, you know, probably a school with 5, 6 aircraft, you know, you can keep properly under control what's going on. You know, everybody knows, you know, who has been flying, you know, if there was something strange, as you mentioned, you know, 50 hours, 100-hour scheduled maintenance. So to be honest, this type of solution becomes very effective when you move, you know, from 8 to 10 above aircraft. The reason for that, because of course you cannot do any longer, you know, with single spreadsheet. You cannot rely only on the scheduled maintenance, because the real point is, and we go back to the concept of asset management, you know, how much availability each aircraft has, you know, how much utilization you have been doing, and, you know, how many students you have been able, you know, to have on your school to assure that, you know, these aircraft are utilized not at the maximum, but at the optimal. And the reason why I say that, because sometimes if you fly too many hours, then the extraordinary maintenance can cancel, you know, all the good job in terms of student, you know, you put on training. So there are a couple of good reasons, and we see our customer can have different perspective. Somebody of them see very interesting to support and improve their training, to provide precise feedback with evidences to the students. You know, we know instructor don't have too much time between one flight and the other to give feedback, and going back later on, probably some of the information can be missed. In this way, the flight is there at any time, you know, can be replayed, 2D, 3D. The instructor can put, you know, comments, and as I mentioned, you can analyze more flight of the same student and see if there is any area he or she need reinforce. So that's, let's say, the first use that can be done. The second one is that, you know, every time, and that's coming from discussion with our customer, you know, for any flight, probably in the back office, there are, you know, 20 minutes of administration. I'm talking about the flight logbook, you know, the registration of all the information, even if you have a digital system. You know, with these devices, the data can be integrated automatically with your software, so your flight logbook is automatically populated. You save time, you can have accuracy on the data, so your job is not data entry, is reviewing, you know, the number and assuring, you know, that all the paperwork have been done properly. The third one where I see the biggest opportunity going forward is more on asset management. As you said, we do maintenance mainly on per schedule, and then, you know, when something goes wrong, the aircraft is on the ground, it doesn't fly, and you don't just have, you know, the maintenance cost, you have the revenue avoidance. And if you keep monitoring your aircraft, you can, and that's where we are investing a lot, anticipate potential issue. And eventually you can put some pre-check, maybe during the standard 1 hour you have already scheduled, and avoid that maybe, you know, after a few hours you are back, you know, in the hangar with your maintenance, you know, organization to fix potential issues. So if you bring it together, you know, you digitize your workflow, you have visibility on what's happened with your aircraft, and you do an appropriate asset management. The data can help you on training, safety, and of course, maintenance cost.
You brought up this word a couple times, and I think it's kind of, I don't want to say the buzzword, but it might be a word that a lot of people don't really understand. And that word is, or I guess the phrase is asset management. So, you know, when I think of assets, at least in my training and my business knowledge, I mean, we have two types of things that we think about. We have liability and an asset, and we don't want our planes to be liabilities. So the way I defined it was, you know, a liability is things that take money away from my pocket, and then an asset is something that puts money in my pocket. So an aircraft, you know, if I'm doing so much maintenance on it, at the end of the day, if I'm losing money, let's say it's not flying as much as it could be, it's more of a liability than it is an asset. As much as we want to believe it's an asset, if we're not managing it right, if we're not having enough enrollments and students flying that plane, then maybe it becomes more of a liability. But that's just kind of how I define assets and liabilities. Is there, what do you, I guess you've brought it up a few times, like asset management. How does that kind of pertain to Intuos and also running a flight school?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, you know, without aircraft, you know, a flight school cannot run. And it's true that, you know, your aircraft, I mean, they are on your balance sheet, you know, you amortize along the time, you know, and hopefully at a certain point you will also be able to sell and maybe make some profit. I guess the question, if I look from a financial perspective, the question is those assets that you have there, and maybe you don't think they have a cost, but they have an implicit cost because you have immobilized money that eventually you could have used differently. So the question is how much of those assets are generating revenue. That's what I mean as asset management. So you have bought aircraft, fine. And you then have in your balance sheet, and I agree with you, it's not liabilities, but it can be an implicit liabilities, because if they don't generate revenue, you just put money somewhere, without any profit. So for me, asset management is how you can find the optimal utilization of your single aircraft so that at the end of the day, your net income, so the income that those aircraft generate, is positive and give you a return on the value of that aircraft.
Yeah, I love it too. Like, it's there's an expression that was shared to me. It's like revenue is like vanity, and like profit is sanity. So if you have a lot of revenue, but then your expenses are pretty high, then it's not really that healthy of a business. Unfortunately, you need to have some leftover for buffer, whether that's to pay for your 100 hours, unexpected costs. Maybe you want to hire someone else. Maybe you want to buy a new plane. You need to have that buffer. You need to have that the profitability in there locked in. Otherwise, it's kind of like I don't know. So
and
you mentioned
Tim, if I can add on that,
Yeah.
a lot of the conversation we are having, and maybe when flight school tell us, we do not have time today to talk about that because they are very keen in growing revenue. And that's fine because, without revenue, you don't have the business. I don't see the same focus on how I manage at the best my cost structure, because that would make a huge difference between a successful and a not successful business.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're first starting out, especially if you only have like, let's say 2-3 planes and you're just starting out there, it really is about bringing the revenue up in there. But once you start hitting around that $1 million mark, when you're around 6 to 8 aircraft, usually at that point you really got to look at, okay, I'm at $1 million business now. How much am I taking home, and how much can I really save, and what's the actual health of this business? There's different types of risk in business. For example, there's key man risk. That's like, for example, if you're the owner of the flight school and you're everywhere, everything goes through you. That's a risk there too. There's also there's a single channel risk. So if all of your revenue is coming just from this one type of aircraft, you're not getting anything else from, let's say you have a fleet of 7, but only one is generating revenue and the other 6 are actually costing you money. That's a risk or a constraint that you need to eliminate from the business. You mentioned aircraft utilization, which is a big topic for a lot of flight schools as far as to understand the health of their operations. A lot of them use this KPI, key performance indicator, of aircraft utilization. So you mentioned it's not maximizing the utilization, is actually optimizing it. So my question, I guess, from your background and your standpoint, what is the optimal, hours per month an aircraft should be flying to be at that high profitability where you're not really overworking it, so you have higher maintenance costs, but you also get the revenue from that aircraft?
Again, it's not, the same for any type of aircraft, and you know better than me, but running, simulation, and so take with the benefit, of a wide range. The aircraft start to be good in terms, of utilization from the 600 hour per year, and something between 600 and 800. If you go above, then probably, the stress and the maintenance cost, could grow a lot. But of course, again, it depends on the type of aircraft. But if I should give you a range, is somewhere, between 600 and 800.
Yeah, 600 to 800 hours a year. That's roughly around 60 hours per month, give or take. Which is that's decently healthy. So I found if it's below 50 hours a month, it's usually at that point you're losing money. So usually we try to shoot for around that 60. I like to hit 70 actually. So maybe I'm thinking about it the wrong way. I've always said 70 should be like your target. So you're kind of saying a little lower, which is interesting. And then maybe at that point, it's not really about increasing the utilization. It's about maybe expanding your fleet. That way you're not going to overwork these aircraft, and then you're not going to have high maintenance costs in the end. Because I've always said 60, 70 hours, but you're saying 55, 67-ish. So 600 to 800 hours a year is okay, I think. And I kind of brought another word up there too, and it was KPI. So key performance indicators. I think for any business that you're running, you need to have some type of metrics in your business in order to assess the health. Whether you have a dashboard or some type of spreadsheet. I hate spreadsheets, but here we are. What type of KPIs do you think are important for a flight school to monitor and understand in order to grow their business?
Well, I think a couple of them. If we start from the aircraft as we mentioned, is the number of hours of availability, the number of hours of utilization, and then if something change in the utilization, how much maybe is driven from cancellation, of lesson, because one of the challenges I've been discussing with some of the flight school is being aware of the reason for cancellation. I mean, some of them, there was a booking, but then, it was canceled. They don't have evidence of the reason why. And this is an important metrics because it tells you a lot about, do you have an issue with the instructor that are not available? Do you have an issue with the student that are not committed enough? It could be the weather, and you cannot really make too much about the weather, at least so far. Who knows in the future? So that's really what I see as a key metrics. Reservation, cancellation, number of hours the aircraft is available, number of hours the aircraft is being utilized, and I think the other point is how much extraordinary maintenance you have been doing, because that could be a signal, of different reason. Either the standard scheduled maintenance is not performed properly, or the aircraft, is not used accordingly. If you think about hard landing, and issue with the gear land, I mean, not everybody tell you that there was an hard landing, and you have a couple of them, and then in the next flight have a big issue. So that's really the things I would look into.
Love that. Yeah, extraordinary maintenance. So I think the best flight schools out there, they say they charge $180 an hour, $200 an hour, something like that. I don't know. And they always have something set aside for maintenance, and that cost, so let's say it's 5-10% of the fee, so $20 per hour for every hour flown for that aircraft. They would then put this in this bucket for maintenance. Now, I guess the biggest question here is, or what you've brought up, is the extraordinary maintenance. So things that happen that are not covered by the 100 hours or the annual. And you mentioned hard landings. Those are we call them slap and goes, right? We don't call them touch and goes. Yeah, so that could be a big issue with flight schools too, is monitoring the condition of the aircraft, especially with newer students or maybe even newer CFIs out there. They're letting the students they're pushing the envelope. Yeah, I agree with that to a certain extent. You want to make sure as a student pilot, they have to see that horrible sight picture of maybe super nose up when they're landing and they just can't control their flare. They need to have that, but then at the same time, it has to be controlled in the sense where we don't want to have a bunch of flat tires and broken struts. So,
well, and that brings that brings to the next point about standardization on the instructor behavior. We heard a lot about that in the different conference. As a flight school, how can you assure a standard approach and way of training from your instructor? And again, if you are not able to identify instructor that maybe exaggerate on one end, you are not able to take action. So looking at the data is also to try to understand your instructor and how you can bring them to the level of training that you expect. It doesn't mean, because then the border is very close. It's not wanted to monitor them and to go against them if they haven't done something properly, because then there is this concern, I'm a monitor, do I want to be monitored? I think is more to talk about the safety culture and the quality of the training. So I think there is this aspect that will become more and more important for a flight school, which is the safety culture inside the organization, how the people in the organization embrace it, and also how you guarantee high level standard of training without going behind the line from a safety perspective.
I've heard that a few times from other podcast guests and other aviation mentors as well. The standardization of CFI instruction. So what is that actually? So obviously there's the ACS for it's a private pilot instrument and all that. Those are standards that are set off by the FAA, and I'm sure there's an European version. There's a European version as well. Sorry, I can't pronounce it very well. For example, you make sure you have your 40 hours of flight time. Make sure you can do steep turns. Make sure you can do short field takeoff and soft field takeoff and landing. Those might be some of the standards that we train them to, but I feel that the standardization of instruction means something a little more deeper than just hitting the ACS minimums, right? What are some of the tips that you can give to some of the schools that, especially those that are just starting out? What are some tips that you can give that can help really define that culture? And that kind of leads me to the next question about safety, but I'll pause here. It really defines the standards that the CFIs are held to. What are some of the tips that we can give to some of the smaller schools out there?
Well, I think probably one step, would be to work on a standard process for the debrief. So if you agree, which should be the process of the debrief from the instructor to the student, this is already the way in which you, let's say, transfer to your instructor culture. So what you expect, they give as feedback to the student what they should highlight as positive and negative, and somehow indirectly, you tell them which type of behavior as a flight school, you are not looking for a student. So I think that's a first interesting way. You don't just work on an individual instructor. You work on some of the processes the instructor are involved, and definitely the debrief could be, I think, a useful tool.
That's a really great point. So shout out to the Aviation Business Podcast, which we're on right now. I think about a year ago, we had a wonderful guest on here. His name is Brandon Williams, and I hope I didn't mess his name up. Brandon Williams, he's I think an retired fighter pilot, and he does a lot of public speaking, and he's going to be at the Ascend Summit coming up in September, by the way. And he does a lot of talks, and his main kind of briefing, or his main type of thing, is all about the debrief, how to really structure the debrief, how to really have an effective post-flight debrief with the students. So if you haven't checked that episode out, check out Brandon Williams over in the Aviation Business Podcast website. And we'll take a pause here, by the way. So I did mention that he's going to be at the Ascend Summit. So if you have not yet got your tickets for the National Association of Flight Instructors Aero Summit, Ascend Summit over in Dallas, please check that out. The link's over here in the description. Caroline's going to be there. We're going to be there. So we're going to have a good time. So you're going to kind of going on that leg here. You're going to be in Dallas with us in a couple of weeks. What's your goal? Just kind of going to the show and meeting, I guess a lot of instructors, CFIs, flight schools, with this new, I guess, company that you've built with Vito. You have Intuos. What's kind of your mission or your I guess your core objective by going to Dallas in the next couple of weeks?
I think, of course, start to build a network in the U.S. market. You know, as we said, we have been working hard in Europe, in South Africa. We are very new in the U.S. market, and we can still, see some differences, between the different markets. So for us, will be a learning opportunity, building network, getting feedback, getting, concern or, objection regarding what we are doing. So that's really our major objective for Ashend and our days in Dallas.
Cool. You mentioned that you're in primarily Europe right now and a little bit in South Africa, and then as you've kind of started to grow your business and bring it to the United States, what are some of the differences in the flight training market compared Europe and South Africa versus United States? Is there any glaring differences that you see in the training quality, the way that the businesses are run, the program structures? What's kind of the differences in the two different international markets here?
Well, I think, we haven't enough experience yet, to outline clearly the differences. I think that we find quite open-minded, people in the U.S., in the sense that they are more open to listen. Europe, is a little bit more, probably is not the right adjective, but formal. And I think, what is interesting is that people, ready to listen, but at the same time, we see in the US, some, I wouldn't say pushback, but a lot of question about which is my ROI. That is good because, it's a fair question. And that gives us the opportunity to explain where we see the ROI. That is the conversation, of today. Because people thinks about revenue and then thinks about the cost, of a solution like the one of Intuos. And they are not really able by themselves, to connect the cost with, the revenue that is more not increasing revenue, but is reduce cost and improve the quality of your product and attract more students. So it's very challenging, but it's also very motivating, in building the concept of the ROI.
I totally agree with that. Like, I think it's just part of our culture here in America. Is we're always it's maybe not the culture in America, maybe the business culture in America, I think, is probably the better way to say it. We're always trying to find ways to increase our revenue, but if we do need to invest in something, whether that's avionics for a plane, whether that's having a flight data monitoring system, whether that's marketing, shout out Right Rudder Marketing, by the way, there's always going to be that question of what's the return on investment, what's the ROI for that. And so that's kind of what I was at. We didn't really allude to that in previous discussions of Intuos, but we did talk a little bit about what the capabilities of Intuos is. So kind of the way it works, the system, the real-time data. It looks like it shoots the data from the sky as well to the ground. That way, if you're on the ground and you're in, let's say your office monitoring the flights, you can see where they are and see what they're doing in the air. How does that? I mean, just to play devil's advocate or be the flight school owner here. What is the ROI for my flight school if I was to install, let's say I have 7 planes, install Intuos in all 7 of my aircraft?
I think 2 pieces. The first one is increasing productivity, reduce the cost of your back office because of the integration I mentioned. The potential increase in revenue because you are able to provide students with your innovative tools, and if you show them that they will be able to replay their flight, understand exactly what they did well, what they did bad, it can become a distinguished element towards other flight schools that just do it verbally or based on the memory of the instructor or the memory of the student. And the piece I will work hard to make, the ROI very clear is on the maintenance cost. I think there is where is still more difficult to pass the message, but it's where, the cost avoidance could make a difference on the P&L of a flight school.
So one of the things that you mentioned is like, real-time data and you're flying around. I don't know. I don't mean to put you on the spot. Do you have a demo of this, or is it possible to do a demo now, or is it something that maybe you have a video maybe you can share later?
Well, I can. The time is not good enough, but give me a second. I check if anybody is on the air. No, nobody is flying a VIM, so I'm not able to give you real time, but I can show you another tool, the 3D flight monitor. Let me open up.
Yeah, on the bottom there's a square with an arrow in it. It's called Share. And it's kind of like a Google Meet.
Sure, yeah, I'll do that. Give me a second. I just open so it becomes, easier.
And by the way, if you are listening and if you are a guest here, if you have any questions while Carolina is kind of prepping her screen to show us some of the cool stuff she got going on, yeah, feel free to drop a comment on the side there. We'll answer it as best we can.
Let me see if we get there. Can you see screen?
Cool.
Okay, so that's really the tool where for the single flight you do a real-time 3D or 2D monitor, and the bottom of the top, this one, if the aircraft was in the air, you would be able to see it. At the moment you see in L'Aquila Airport where we have our headquarters, but then at the same time I can show you, the last 50 flight with all the information. You can do the replay, real time, and then you have last flight charting. Let me see what's going on here.
The previous ones up there.
Let me see if with all the screen open, which one? Yeah, here you go. So that's the charting of the flight with the altitude, elevation, ground speed, vertical speed, people, acceleration, and the track.
Wow, it's pretty neat data. I don't know if it's the same system that one of our schools use. We have a school in Ohio, not Ohio. We do have a school in Ohio, but there's another school we have in in Florida, and they also had something similar. I don't know which software they're using. It might be you guys. I don't know. They were also able to do like similar, like a 3D model where you're able to see the plane in the air and to see like the KPI, like metrics, so airspeed, ground speed, things like that, elevation, altitude. And I guess what the school was now tasked on, they had like not an engineer, but like a CFI do this. They had the task they had was really to look at the data, then find kind of the trend to help find maybe there's an opportunity for maintenance or opportunity or maybe there's maybe a mishap that's happening with a certain aircraft. So they wanted to take a look at this data and do it. So having that data is something that schools just currently don't have. I mean, most schools don't have stuff like this at all. I mean, I brought up a school in Orlando, Florida, whatever. But I would say the majority, if not almost all schools in United States, I don't think they have this flight data monitoring equipment yet. So it's going to be a really cool thing to see, especially in the upcoming months and years as this kind of gets integrated with it. And especially I'm kind of alluding to the future here. Maybe you're able to plug in some type of AI LLM bot there that just monitors all this data, and then from there it picks it out like boom, here it is. Hey, there's an example. They had this one guy. It was a CFI, and they were monitoring the flights, and they noticed that every couple of months they'd have to fix the flaps. The flaps would always break. Something's wrong with the motor or something like that. It would always burn out. The motor would burn out early, And then they found it that if this one instructor flew this plane or other planes that he flew, it was because on his final approach, he like dumped the flaps and it'd be over the white arc. So they were able to distill it down. It's because of this one instructor was doing it and not following procedure. And they finally singled it out. And then that's the power of this. If you're able to get that type of data and get that granular into it, and figure that type of stuff, that's the rewards you're able to get and some of the ROI.
Yeah, I think the real challenge is how to make the data easily, available and understandable from the people, in the flight school. They have another job. They have to run a business. Everybody has his own specific role. And in any industry, too many data do not mean, better information. So really the challenge and where we are working on is to understand which level of details and which insights, make sense, because I keep saying, when you're using like the software to manage the school you use every day and it becomes part of your DNA, data is very easy to get, let's say, I don't know in English how you say, but not to love any longer, because you don't find the insights, you find low useful, and so I think the big challenge for everybody working on flight data is really to make them meaningful for the audience.
I think that's so true. I know obviously my specialty is in marketing, and there's so much data when it comes to marketing too. We present to our customers and our flight school partners, cost per lead, things like that. But there's so much more that goes into it that I kind of choose to hide because I don't want to overwhelm them. Because they think about it, you run a Google ad or something like that, you have cost per click, you have click-through rate, you have return on ad spend, you have then other KPIs that you think of, you have keyword rankings, you have your domain authority, all these different types of metrics that are out there to really assess how well the marketing is performing. And at the end of the day, what it matters to me is how many butts are in seats, how many people are flying, how many leads came in, how many inquiries came into my schools, and then how many of those inquiries then converted into actual enrollments. That's what really matters for our schools. And I think if we overload our team members or anybody that's working in this industry with too much data, it's really getting that data to mean something. And I think that's the hardest part, and it's probably a challenge that you're addressing in the market is taking this data, this flight data, and using that to really increase the safety. And I guess that leads me to one of my last questions here. Earlier, you were talking about, how do we, help a flight school? And we talked about the post debrief and all that type of stuff. But one of the things we mentioned as well was the culture and the safety culture of a flight school. And I think that's, I used to work in manufacturing, and we had this expression that's like safety is number one. So we always talk about safety first. You say safety first, 10 fingers and 10 toes, which means if you're in the factory world or in manufacturing, you want to come home with 10 fingers and 10 toes. You don't want to get amputated. Same thing with flight training. We don't want a mishap. We don't want any of that. We don't want accidents. We don't want incidents to occur in our industry. So every little thing that we can do helps really the flight schools and our students and our customers to be safe. So it's always not one thing. It's always a multitude of things that happen, mishaps that accumulated and then brought to the horrible event. So I want to ask you here, we were talking about safety culture. What are some of the tips you can give to some of the flight schools that are running here to really improve their safety culture and help train a more safe and efficient pilot at the end of the day?
I think to have some basic process in place where few data are shared, so people become aware, of what happened, in the air, and if there was anything that is worthwhile to highlight, do that. But it must be clear in this session that is not like being in court. You are not with a judge, there, that it should be coming, from the management of the flight school that, looking at the data, understanding what worked well, what didn't work so well is a way to grow together. So safety, should be associated with the growth opportunity for everybody and not as a tool to control, and to blame somebody that maybe did something out of the standard.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, like, you can't have a safety culture where someone reports a mishap, whether it's a near miss or something like that we call it. You don't want anybody reporting something like that and then using that as a way to, I guess, cast blame and also punish people. That causes the culture to break down, because if people are afraid to really voice out safety concerns due to loss of job or whatever, you're not going to be able to build your culture. I totally agree with that. So, okay, as we wrap up, we're in the last 10 minutes here. Again, if you are listening to this, we have I think about 10 people on the call earlier. Feel free to ask questions while we have. We'll be able to address them. But what I like to do towards the last part of these episodes or these shows is really kind of give you a platform to do what's called a call to action. So. A call to action is really, you mentioned, your intention for going to Ascend, for example, is to network and meet a lot of people. I guess here, you can voice whatever you like, as far as, a call to action for your business, a call to action for the pilot community. Is there anything that you'd like to share or kind of announce to the world as far as helping your business or growing your business or helping the flight school and helping train more safe and efficient pilots?
Well, I think from our side, we are here in the US, to learn and to bring value. So anybody, even if just to know more about what we do. So I'm not this stage looking for customer. I'm not yet looking for customer. I'm more looking, for counterpart. We can really discuss. So feel free to reach me out. We can set up, a video call, walk you through the solution, get your input, your feedback, answer your questions. So we are definitely open to learn more about what you need and to let you know more of what we are building, because we are still building. So there are a lot of opportunity, to bring in ideas and maybe pieces that we haven't covered or thought yet.
Love it. Yeah, so if you are looking for a good conversation and also really to look at flight data monitoring and having a system in place to really capture that, I highly recommend checking out Carolina at Intuos. How do we reach you if we're interested in engaging in conversation or really learning more about Intuos and your flight data system?
You can Intuos.aero, you can book a demo at any time, and you can also write directly to my email is carolina.gianardi@intuos.it. So very easy.
Okay, so you send her an email at carolina.giarlotti@intuos.it, if you said, and then also Intuos.aero. Oh, Intuos.it, yeah. Right? Okay. And then Intuos.aero is the website, I believe, and then that has a lot of data, a lot of information of what they do. Highly recommend checking it out. And of course, if you are going to be at the Ascend Summit coming up in September 8th, me and Carolina are going to be there. We'd love to shake your hand, love to get to know you, love to get to know your flight training operations, see if there's anything that me or Carolina can help you with. So yeah, check out the Ascend Flight Training Summit. It's in Dallas, Texas, coming up in a few weeks. We're super excited. Me and my team are going to be there. So we're going to wrap up here, but before we go, I'll have a few call to actions of myself. So if you would like to be a guest on this podcast, yeah, give us a call, 314-804-1200. There's also info@rightruddermarketing.com. That is our main business email, and I will be able to see that. Also, if you're a flight school and you're looking to grow and expand your school, enroll more student pilots, highly recommend booking a call with one of me or one of my team members. We'd love to see what you're doing, love to learn about your flight training operations, see if there's any room for improvement, any opportunities in there, whether it's your Google ads, Facebook, your website, SEO, all that type of stuff, where you show up on AI search. We do have a webinar coming up later this week on Thursday. So Thursday at 2 p.m. Central. It's going to be a small little room, kind of similar to here, where we're going to be talking about, we're going to get all into the tactics of SEO, all into the tactics of how to show up on AI search, how to show up on Google search, how to really program your website and your marketing such that you can show up on top and then get the students, get the leads, and then get the enrollment. So that's what we're here for. We're here to help you guys out. I'd love to have you on the show. Love to just talk to you, whether you're at Ascend, whether you just contact me digitally. I'm really looking forward to talking to you guys. So we're gonna end here. Thank you, Carolina, for so much for hopping on here. I know what time is it over there? You're in Europe,
It's
right?
it's almost 9 p.m.
9 p.m. Thank you so much for hopping on in the late evening hours, Carolina. We really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to meeting you in Dallas in a few weeks.